Welcome, our internet. How are you? Let's see if we have anybody joining in out here. All right, so we're going to be busy here talking about mushrooms for the next 20 or 30 minutes. Kind of exciting. Let's see. Welcome to the great internet people around the world. We're really excited to be here talking about mushrooms. All right. Who do we have with us?
So we've got Maggie Richardson.
Oh, Maggie's with us. Hi, Maggie. It's good to see you.
And Elizabeth Connor Lent.
Oh, Elizabeth. Fantastic. All right. So we're just letting a few people join in here. We actually picked a perfect day to talk about mushrooms. So it's actually raining right now. So we're out here in Sebastian, Florida. And it's a very nice, beautiful, light rain. Very, you can see the patterns out on the water of the rain droplets falling. I actually just took a walk around the property and found a few mushrooms. So this is perfect timing to be talking about. So today I want to talk a little bit about how to grow your own mushrooms and a little bit about like what mushrooms are and give you kind of a little background of them. Mushrooms are an amazing kingdom. They actually have their own kingdom. They're more related to animals than plants. They actually breathe oxygen, unlike a plant that would breathe CO2. And when we think of a mushroom, this is what most people think of when they think of a mushroom. And this is actually the smallest part of the mushroom. This is the fruiting body. So if you were to think of like an apple tree, the apple would be the mushroom, and the apple tree, that's a much larger part of the mushroom, and that's the mycelial mat underneath the ground. And you usually don't see that. It usually can look like white veins growing through a log or on the ground. That's the mycelial mat, and that's a much larger part that most people don't see. A mushroom reproduces. It's pretty amazing. It'll take spores and release them out into the air. This right here is the mushroom gill, and it'll just release millions and millions of spores, and then as those spores float through the air, it'll find the hypha just similar to it, meet together, and they'll start making mycelium. And mycelium will grow through they'll feed on lignin, they'll start reproducing until they create a mushroom body when it's ready to reproduce again. So it's pretty exciting. We're going to talk about pretty much 3 types of mushrooms. That's the parasitic, saprophytic, and mycorrhizal. So mostly what we're going to be talking about is saprophytic, which basically is going to feed on decomposing material. So today we're going to be talking about shiitake mushrooms. And shiitake mushrooms mostly feed on dead wood. So some kind of tree limb. We're going to use oak as an example today. So mushrooms have been around in human culture for over 5,000 years. There's actually cases of a 5,300-year-old culture who used mushrooms to carry fire around. So it's pretty amazing when you see the human worlds combining together. It's been happening for quite some time. Shamans have used mushrooms to go on vision quests and kind of like see the other side, if you will, and that's always pretty exciting. So that's been in our culture for a while, and of course you can make teas. They have medicinal benefits, all sorts of wonderful properties.
How did they carry fire with mushrooms?
Oh, fantastic. I'd love to answer. So the question is, how did they carry fire around with these mushrooms? Well, there's a polypore, it's actually a birch polypore, that they could put a coal from the night's fire into that little pouch, and the mushroom would burn real slowly, so as they could travel, they'd walk around with this little coal with them, so when they got to their next place, it was easy for them to start a fire again. So it's pretty neat little piece in history. They didn't have Bic lighters back then, so as much fire was the difference between warmth and cooked food versus a cold night. Now, mushrooms are extremely intelligent, and there's a lot of debate on plants animals having intelligence, because they might not talk about the stock market or things we hold important as humans. But I believe plants and animals are extremely intelligent, and mushrooms are just as intelligent. One way we can see this is an experiment they did about the Tokyo subway system. And what they did was they mapped out the Tokyo subway system and put little grain spawn at all the stops, and they let the slime mold run through it. And the slime mold actually mapped out a Tokyo subway system more efficient than the one that humans created. So that's pretty amazing when you just think about the fact that this slime mold can actually have the intelligence to do that. So it's pretty amazing. If you ever are out walking in nature on hikes, you'll see mushrooms growing all over the place. I found these just walking right here. These are some honey mushrooms here. Beautiful little cluster. Please, oh, here you go. So you can see them. Beautiful. And you'll see these mushrooms have beautiful gill patterns, little roselle. Fantastic. Now, whenever you're out identifying mushrooms, really know what you're looking at. Don't ever start just eating mushrooms. True, there are very few mushrooms that can kill you here in Florida. There are a few that will make you sick, and definitely a few that can kill you. So never ingest a mushroom unless you're 100% sure you know what it is. When in doubt, throw it out. And as far as identifying mushrooms, you're going to want to look at the cap, the gills, the different ways where it's growing, what it's growing in. After you think you know what it is, the best way to really identify a mushroom is to do a spore print. And a spore print's really easy to do, where you would just take a mushroom. I like to use a pane of glass and just put it on there for about 24 hours. And what it's going to do is it's going to sporulate and leave the spores out there. And the reason I like to use a pane of glass is because those spores are going to be different colors. So if it has like a white spore print, you won't see it. But with the pane of glass, you'll pretty much see any color. And it's a great way to identify mushrooms. So there's mushrooms that will grow in the lawn. You may have seen fairy rings growing out there, where it's just these large circles of mushrooms growing in a circle. Those are really exciting. You'll see mushrooms growing at the base of trees, pretty much everywhere. Here in Florida, we have some amazing reishi mushrooms, which are a medicinal mushroom, and they grow down by the river banks. And I've seen them on cabbage palm and anywhere up on oaks and trees. So, something I've been excited about lately is integrating mushrooms into the gardens. So, if you do any kind of shaded gardening, you can actually use mushrooms as the bordering logs around those gardens and inoculate the hay that you may use as mulch. And because there's so much shade under the plant overstory, you're going to have shade, water, and moisture. And then if you inoculate those with, say, oyster mushrooms or shiitake mushrooms, you can actually be growing mushrooms as a secondary crop into your gardens, as well as providing the mulch, which is going to give you shade, stop weeds, give you extra moisture, really support that microorganisms and organic life that's going on under your soil. And plus it looks cool to have mushrooms growing up through your gardens that you can just pick and eat. And there's a good list of mushrooms you can grow, from King Stropharia, which grows really well in compost piles, things like that. Or they also call that the wine cap. To oyster mushrooms, which are really easy to grow and will pretty much grow on most decomposing material. So, how do we grow mushrooms? So exciting. So let's start with mushroom logs. This is an example of a mushroom log. And this is one that I inoculated about 1.5 years ago. And I don't know if you can see it, but there's little holes right there. Those have been, I'll get even closer. Whoa. So those are holes in which we've taken dowels that have been inoculated with mushrooms, mycelium spawn, and little pieces of wood, and drill holes in there and just knock them in there, and they let that mycelium grow. I'll go over the whole process with you. But how you can tell that it's in there is you see that like white haze. That's actually the mycelium. And what that's going to do is grow under that cambium layer, under the bark right there. And it's going to grow, and this is a cold mushroom. So once it starts getting cold in Florida, which is a good 3 or 4 months out of the year, we will start sprouting shitty mushrooms. And I'll go over the whole procedure. So mushrooms I've found that work really well on logs are reishi, the shiitakes, pearl oysters, chicken of the woods, turkey tails, and lion's mane have done really well on logs. Now, as far as wood that I like to use oak. Now, we have a lot of oak in this area, and it's really my favorite to use growing mushrooms. But here you can also use elm, sweet gum, which that's the one with all those little spiky balls on it. And because if you've ever walked barefoot and stepped on one of those spiky balls, it's kind of a sweet revenge to use it to grow mushrooms. But don't cut down all the trees. I was just joking. But the main point is don't use conifers. Don't use pine. Don't use cedar. Anything that's oily or really has an odor to it is probably not going to be good mushrooms in. Another tip for the wood you're going to use is you want to cut it about 2 weeks before you're going to use it. And the reason that is because when you cut these trees, a lot of them will put out like an microbial, it'll kill all the the mycelium that's growing on it. So if you inoculate the oak logs, you'll actually kill the mycelium that you introduce, and that'll of course be detrimental. So you want to wait about 2 weeks for that to like wear off and dilute, which is much better. Now, you also don't want to wait too long. So I like to use them before 2 or 3 months, but I definitely wouldn't use them like longer than 3-4 months, because at that point all your wild mycelium is going to be introduced in there, and you're going to have to compete with that in order to really get your culture started. So I like to use a good 2-week to 4-week fresh cut live oak is my favorite, and that's what we have here. So for the inoculation, I like to use, like I said, the grain dowels, the mycelium dowels. And these are just little pieces of wood that have had the mycelium growing through it. My favorite source for these is Fungi Perfecti. That's Paul Stamets mushroom company. I've always gotten really fantastic grain spawn from him. Wonderful, wonderful mushrooms. There's also Mountain up in, I believe they're in South Carolina or Georgia, and I've got as well. But Fungi Perfecti would be my go-to if you're just getting into this, and a great place to get. So you're looking for shiitake oyster dowels. Just search that, should be able to find it, and you could get anywhere from 100 to 1,000, depending on how many logs you want to do. I usually like to put about 100 dowels into one log, so that'll kind of shape your order there. So the things you're going to need is a drill. You're going to use a 5/16 drill bit, same size. You're going to need a rubber mallet, and that's going to be to hammer these dowels in there. So you're going to drill your little holes, rubber mallet them right in there, and then I like to use a wax to cover it up. So what I do is I heat up wax, and then I'll paint it onto the edges here, right here, and that's to kind of seal it in there. Now that wax usually falls off after the first year, but that way you're keeping out any of the other spores, all the other mushroom cultures. You're keeping those out as your shiitake mushrooms get established.
Are there any good places to find logs that are already inoculated locally?
Ooh, Well, yes, there are. So when you say locally, imagining, the question was, are there good places to find mushroom spawn or inoculated logs locally? I imagine you're talking about Orlando, because that is, I imagine, where you're from. So my mushroom farm, I'm not sure if he's doing logs. He does know all things mushroom. He's a mushroom guru out there. So if you don't know John Martin, get to know him. And of course, the next would be Caitlin. I believe she's at the Peanut Butter Palace, right? Little peanut butter. So you could check her out as well. Those would be my two suggestions for getting them locally. However, it's so much fun to do it yourself. Let's go ahead and do it yourself. Now, if you talk to John Martin, he's really an expert growing on straw. And growing on straw is just a fantastic method where you just take straw, you boil it at about 170 degrees for an hour to where you're going to sterilize it and then inoculate that, and then you can grow quite an abundance of mushrooms on that method. And I do believe he's selling those commercially using those methods. You can also use grain spawn, and that's using like pressure cookers and all sorts of really intense, more scientific methods.
All right, you are back to live.
Yay! We took a small break there as our connection was reestablishing. So back to shiitake mushroom logs. So let's say you've taken your drill, you've drilled 100 holes in a thing. I like to do it about every 3 to 4 inches. And then, so I put them in every 3 to 4 inches. You put all your dowels in, and you wax. So now what do? The best thing I like to do is keep this in a shady spot for about a year. Wow. So you just put it into a nice shady spot and forget about it. I like to keep it in a place that gets irrigated. So one of my favorite spots would be like a shady spot under a tree that the sprinklers hit. Then you just really don't have to think about it. You're going to want to keep it up off the ground. If you put this right on the ground, it's going to pretty much rot really quick. Plus, you're going to have a lot of competing fungi getting up in there. And we want to make sure we're growing shiitakes and not something else. So we've inoculated this, and now like a little spot tucked up under a tree here. Check this out. I'm going to go put this right over here. Ooh. Can you see that over there? I just kind of tucked it into a tree area. It's up off the ground, and it'll get sprinkled on. So that's a great spot. And then basically you're going to want to forget about it for about a year. After that year, it's going to be about October, November, when it starts to get cold. That's when that's going to want to fruit. So the way you trigger the fruit is you want to shock it. Now in nature, if you've ever seen a fresh tree fall, it'll vibrate really hard. And that tree, if you've ever seen a whole tree just flush out with mushrooms, a fresh fallen tree, it's quite amazing. I stumbled upon a tree of oysters in the woods, and it made 50 pounds of just delicious fresh oyster mushroom. And that's just how nature would then get more mushroom spores out. So what we do is we kind of trick it, and I like to use cold water. So I'll take that and soak it in cold water for 24 hours. I use 50-gallon rain barrels, and I'll usually do about 5 or 10 logs at a time. Let them sit for 24 hours, take them out, put them on the tables in the fruiting area, and then let them just sit. Now, what they do is they'll start developing these little pinhole mushrooms, and then within a week you should have full-grown shiitake mushrooms. At that point, you'll just cut them right at the base, harvest your mushrooms, of course eat them in whichever way you'd like, and then I'll let that rest for a bit. I like to let them rest for about 3 weeks, and then you can start the whole process. and then fruit them as long as the weather allows. I've had as many as four good fruits per year, and I can get about a pound of shiitake off of a single log. So that's pretty significant. My total yields within a year, I can do about 40 pounds every season, and that's quite a bit of shiitake mushrooms. So are there any questions on growing shiitake mushrooms?
Florida School of Holistic Living says, so cool, I never knew about the need to shock.
Yes. Now, a log will shock, a log will fruit naturally when the conditions are right, but you're not going to get quite the harvest out of it. I remember after a hurricane here at Kashi, all of the mushrooms after the hurricane fruited. And we ended up with, at one time, we had like 30 pounds of mushrooms. I didn't know what to do with it. Every single log was just covered in mushrooms, and the hurricane had shocked it. So it's pretty amazing when you see these natural cycles and we get plugged into it, that you can really observe how we can imitate those same patterns to create bigger harvests. So it's pretty exciting. Here we get to see all the cycles of the seasons. We're on 80 acres of wild Florida land, so we have every niche you can imagine. We have the wetlands, we have dry pine forests, we have oak overstories, and each one of them have different harvests. So it's really exciting to be here, to be able to connect with the land, whether we're wild foraging mushrooms or harvesting fresh mushrooms. So that's an exciting little introduction into mushrooms. We're so excited to be able to express our love for them. Once you get into this is a hobby that will not stop, and it's definitely something that can take a lifetime. I've explored into making mushroom beds, and these are like garden beds that will actually produce large amounts of mushrooms. And what I like to use is mulch. So you do use hardwood mulch, which would be oak or any kind of elm. Chip that up and then basically make a lasagna out of mycelium. So you can use mulch, newspaper, mycelium, mulch, newspaper, mycelium, and this creates a perfect environment for those mycelium to just run through the entire mulch layer and create a large bed. You can make these 8 by 8, 20 by 20, and make a large bed of fruit-growing mushroom beds. The newspaper is kind of like a fast digested food. The mushrooms eat that very quickly because it has a high, easy to break down food source. And then another great thing to use is cardboard. Cardboard, if you look at it, has beautiful tunnels that grow through it, and those mushrooms just love to grow through those tunnels, and it makes a perfect little jumping off spot for them to get strongly established. So for a fun project, just get yourself some mycelium. My favorite for this project would probably be like a King Stropharia or a wine cap mushroom, and make those layers to where you just stack up your layers of mushroom mulch, newspaper. You can use cardboard, and let it sit for a good 3 to 6 months, and then you would fruit it in the same way. Just water it really, really heavy. That'll shock it, and then watch your mushrooms grow. And those are another ones that'll keep producing for a large amount of times. I also like to plant those under banana trees and different kind of shady areas that have like heavy feeding compost piles. So one of my favorite setups is to do a banana circle, a compost pile underneath it, and then King Stropharia inside that. And the mushrooms will help break down the compost. The compost is going to feed your bananas, and the bananas are going to create this beautiful shady environment for the whole thing to grow into. It's pretty amazing. Let's see, what else can we do? We'll do one more mushroom example of a way to like really dive into the mushroom world. and that is a subterranean mushroom bed. Oh, so this is really exciting. And this one you can pretty much start with a cardboard box, where we're going to do that same lasagna style that we were talking about in a mulch pile, where we're going mushroom, mulch, newspaper, mycelium layer, fill the entire box full of it, really crunch it down. Mushrooms really like the pressure. They don't want loose air spaces or that. They really want a lot of pressure, pressing them down. Bury that underneath an oak tree that gets a lot of leaf falling on it. And then those will actually send out mycelium until it finds that perfect fruiting spot. And what you'll find is in the next year, you'll actually see your oyster mushrooms are a great choice for this one, because growing up along the tree drip lines. And it's a great way to introduce mycelium into your project that you're doing. So here, please, I hope you got something out of this mushroom experience. We're really proud to do weekly free permaculture classes at Sustainable Kashi. You can go to sustainablekashi.com to check it out. We teach many subjects. Next week, actually, we have Jeff Trapani joining us, talking about the biodiversity of this beautiful planet. And if anyone, is there any questions? No one has any questions? I must have done a fantastic job then. Thank you so much for allowing me into your space today. And I hope you all have fun playing in this mushroom playground.